Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining NJBIA to talk about our favorite thing, the state budget, and especially our favorite thing this year when it's not so friendly to the business community. So, give it another minute and we'll get started. Just going through some of this stuff, and I do hope to be interactive. So either use Zoom to display your hand being up or try to wave at me, or feel free to, if there's a pause, interject, because I want to hear from you guys, because again, as I always say, BIA is better advocating for you, all of our members, when we're hearing from you and knowing what your priorities are. So we're this webinar presentation will be kind of focused on a lot of traditional budget issues, but I know many of you have unique budget issues that I'm happy to try to assist you with in any way I can. And so we'll be happy to help, and I'm glad you're here to listen to what we have to say.
Real quick, Chris, the CBT line, the CBT hike, there's no actual language. Right now, all that there is budget and brief, right?
You're 100% right. That's all there is. And my guess, and it's something I'll say, that's something even more to worry about, is when you are dealing with all the accountants you're dealing with, all the tax attorneys, all the corporate tax folks that we talk to, like, there's probably not going to be bill language to even look at until June. And yet it's going to be retroactive back to January 1st. So it's utterly ridiculous. And see, you're spoiling the surprise, Jeff. We're jumping ahead of ourselves.
Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody asked me to make sure I get the answer.
No, it's I'm glad and not glad to be talking about corporate taxes.
Right, right. You know, when they asked me, is there any language? First I was like, what, are you kidding me? And then I was like, well, maybe. I was like, they don't even have the budget itself out yet. But then I was like, you know what? Maybe I better check. And who else would know but you?
Well, no, I always appreciate you and your questions and all the good stuff that we get from the CPA Society. So so with that, we will start. Again, thank you very much for joining us, all of you. And we've done this now a couple of years in a row, and BIA and our staff jump quickly into the budget and brief and are there at the budget address in Trenton and talking to everybody in the State House, and everything we can kind of compile, all the information, intel that we got. I want to give a chance to report back to our members and see if I can help you in any way with your concerns, whether it's your members, yourself, your clients. But we want to be of service to you when it comes to something as big and complicated and unwieldy as our state budget. So unfortunately, unlike I think some of the previous years, there's not a lot of good news in here. And this is, I can confidently say, this is the first budget in several that BIA is outright opposed to. There's in the past, I know, I'll certainly get into more details here than just talking about things we don't like, but in the past, when we testified or we did press releases, BIA had a lot of, hey, we liked A, B, and C, but we're really worried about X, Y, and Z. And this year, it's going to be a little less of that, not much equivocation, and more just all the things that we're very worried about to hurt the future of our state, whether it's our fiscal position or our economic competitiveness. And not a surprise, but number one, and the thing that is, like, from the outset that jumps out to you when you look at this budget, is it has $1 billion tax increase. We have not seen a tax increase of that kind in years. Thankfully, in New Jersey, we've had a healthier budget position in recent years. But going back to where we have $1 billion tax increase, and you know what? Even in past years, we might have had a couple $100 million here, $100 million here. This year, it's $1 billion. It's all on the back of our corporations, and many of which are BIA members, and we're very lucky and fortunate to have them as BIA members. We're lucky and fortunate to have them as New Jersey's biggest job creators. And I will spend a decent amount of time talking about the corporate tax increase because it's one of the biggest features of this FY25 budget. But I think there's some attention being said, oh, it's only 600 companies. And we all know that those 600 companies create a ton of jobs, and it's way more than that smaller portion of jobs. It's a huge chunk, percentage of the jobs in the state. A ton of contracting with other businesses, smaller and medium-sized businesses in the state that don't pay into this surtax, and big parts of the community. And these are also the giant multinational corporations that can locate anywhere in the world and expand and build and invest and put more capital into anywhere in the world. And we're saying, no, we want to have the highest taxes in the entire nation, and make it less attractive to come and expand and grow here. So that's our biggest concern. The CBD surtax, I like to start with that, not because I like it, but I think the context of the budget has to be taken within just that first very glaring $1 billion increase. It is something that we outright oppose strongly as possible, oppose because it hurts our competitiveness. It also represents a broken promise from Governor Murphy, and that just as recently as 2 weeks ago, Governor Murphy was doing a radio interview with WNYC News and Nancy Solomon, and was even pushed back by the reporter herself. Oh, don't you regret letting the sun set? And he said, no, it's the right thing to do. It hurts our corporate competitiveness, and corporate jobs are important in New Jersey. So the governor was saying the right thing 2 weeks ago. I don't know what changed, but it's frustrating that our corporations and a lot of us on this phone understand, like when you're budgeting, you need to be able to plan. You need to be able to know where your revenues are going, where your spending's going, what's going to happen in the future. And having a unpredictable, volatile tax environment is not helpful towards that. We also strongly oppose this tax because we don't need it. We have a giant surplus. Governor Murphy and many of these calls in past couple of years, I've touted, Governor Murphy's done a decent job building up our state surplus. And the whole policy behind a surplus, it's a fiscal tool to help stabilize taxes and stabilize spending, so that when you do have a downturn, such as what we're in right now, where revenues aren't as strong as you expected and wanted, well, you don't need to immediately go to a $1 billion tax increase. You don't need to immediately cut, as we did in past years, decades ago, is cut the pension or cut school aid. No, like school aid's important for our property taxpayers and our schools and our children. Pension's important. It's a promise we've made to our public employees. Our tax environment's important to our competitiveness. And so we want to be able to keep smoother taxes and smoother spending in our critical areas. And that's what the surplus is there for, to help smooth that, stabilize that. And so it's unconscionable that you have billions of dollars sitting there in the bank, and yet you're getting increased taxes by $1 billion. It's also unnecessary because it's being dedicated towards NJ Transit, this corporate tax increase. And yet their fiscal cliff for NJ Transit's next year, not now. So their emergency that we're trying to address with this new corporate tax increase is an FY26 issue, not an FY25 issue. Now, next year, maybe it would have happened anyway, and we would be fighting it then. It's not like it would be a good thing next year, but it's still doing it a year early. It's $1 billion extra out of the pockets of our corporations that could have gone to capital investments and jobs and growth, and just the symbolic nature of doing what you don't need to is hard. It's also just terrible policy to dedicate corporate taxes to something that we value, like transportation infrastructure. It's very volatile. Corporate taxes are very hard to predict. They go up and down, and something you're dedicating doesn't make a lot of sense to have something as volatile as that. It's also, because you're dedicating it, it means it's permanent. As a lot of accountants, tax attorneys have educated me on, and corporate tax folks, is that when a corporate tax for publicly traded companies is temporary, you can book it and it means different things to your balance sheet. But once it's permanent, it's almost like a double hit, where it's a cash impact of paying these bigger taxes, but it's also a balance sheet impact. And that double hit is doubly painful for a lot of our corporations. And so making it permanent is even worse. And the other thing that's gotten a lot of attention the past couple of days, and rightfully so, and I credit the South Jersey Chamber on this, and BIA has said it as well in our statements, is there's no good nexus between corporate taxes and our transportation infrastructure, especially if you think about, if you're a corporation that's paying this tax and you're in South Jersey where there's no NJ Transit buses or trains, why are you paying into this? If you're a corporation in Sussex County and you don't have a lot of NJ Transit infrastructure, why are you paying into it? To my knowledge, based on our research from BIA, there's no state in the nation that uses uses a corporate tax to dedicate towards their transportation infrastructure. Some states use sales tax, which I think makes a lot more sense, and I'll get to that later. But no state does corporate taxes, so I don't think it's a good policy. So our understanding of this is that there were 3,100 companies in the state that were paying the old surtax that expired on December 31st, just a few weeks ago. This new surtax is only for those earning more than $10 million instead of the $1 million threshold that expired. and now it's going to be 600 companies that are paying into this instead of 3,100. But the interesting thing that Treasury was surprised about when they went to the numbers is that even though it's 3,100 to 600, the actual revenue that they collect is pretty similar, because most of the revenue is coming from the biggest companies that have the biggest earnings. So these 600 companies are putting in $1 billion into our budget this year. They're booking 820 million going forward, but this year it's about $1 billion because of the fact that it's retroactive and some of the aspects with the timing of it. But the funny thing and sad thing is they still don't even know exactly what they're going to do. As I pointed out, that they're dedicating it for NJ Transit. They don't have a need at NJ Transit yet. It's more of an FY26 need. So what happens in FY25 with this money? Right now it's going into surplus, which, again, we're raising taxes to put it in the bank. I want to just quickly run through some of the other revenues that we should know about in this budget, and then get more into the general budget. And please, again, interrupt me. Does anybody have any questions about the corporate tax? Yes, Jennifer? Oh, you're muted, Jennifer.
Sorry about that. I was just at the Orthodox Jewish Chamber of Commerce meeting with Tom this morning, talking about New Jersey's Economic Development Day. And we heard from Tim Sullivan and Tim, the other Tim with the great British voice from Choose New Jersey.
Okay.
And he was talking about all the plans that New Jersey has and the outreach to other countries to bring business here. If that's a state plan, did the governor address any reason why he would then make it unattractive when he's spending lots of money going to foreign countries to get people to come here for business? It made no sense to me hearing just, that was just polar opposite, and it makes no sense. So I didn't know if he addressed that or not.
He did not. I would say Governor Murphy, up until just the other day, and including very recent statements 2 weeks ago, but there are also statements in lame duck he made to a number of, whether it was a BIA audience, Chamber of Commerce audience, local chamber audiences, and then even going back to last June, said how silly it would be to raise a tax to pay for a tax cut, or how silly it would be to, how much it would hurt our competitiveness to do something like this. So he'd said, I know revenues are going to be softer, but this is the right thing to do to let it sunset. So I don't know what changed. And I think you're 100% right, Jennifer, in that it hurts our competitiveness. Now, to be fair to the Murphy administration, they've repeatedly said there's more than just taxes that impact our competitiveness. And they're right. It's not, it would be unfair of me to say this is the only thing. And whether it's our location, but there's not a lot that our state's doing to change the location. We're kind of stuck with it for better or for worse. Our infrastructure, and they could argue that infrastructure is what makes us attractive, and this is maybe helping make sure the infrastructure stays solid with NJ Transit. It's our workforce and our very educated population in New Jersey. And again, there's some things going on in this budget that aren't as helpful to that as possible. There's some things that are more positive. So I think taxes is a big piece of that. And definitely, I think it's an important piece that a lot of corporations will look at. I've definitely heard, it is a fact that I've heard from corporations that when they're looking to think about relocating or expanding, they'll go to their tax people and have a write-up of the different cities and states that they're looking at. Now, that's one of the pieces, because I'm sure they're also looking at the infrastructure and workforce and location and maybe tax incentives and everything else that are in play there. But to discount one major factor in that competitiveness, I think, is short-sighted, and because ultimately the biggest revenue growth is not from taxes; it's from organic, natural revenue growth, because the economy's growing, and they're kind of hurting themselves in the long run with this. But thank you.
Thank you.
Eric has a question, and then I'll jump back into the other revenues before I get to the overall budget. Eric?
Yeah, just two quick questions. One, is it possible to get a list if it's only 600 people? Is that like confidential information, or is that something that could be Oprah or something? And then the other, it's not really dedicated, right? I mean, they're saying it's dedicated, but 3 years from now, all this money could be in the pension fund or the stay in J or something, right? I mean, isn't that the thing that the court decided over the pension fund, and you need a constitutional amendment to dedicate
Yes.
it? Or
So both good questions. I think the revenue, and I don't know if you were on early when Jeff asked this question before we began, but ultimately there's no bill, and we know the way this works is for all the things in this budget that require legislation, we probably won't see that until June. And unfortunately, it'll probably be like June at 10, 11 o'clock at night in a budget committee. And then boom, there's no testimony taken. And then all of a sudden they're voting on it a couple days later at the end of June. So the process will probably leave something to be desired again, especially when it's something like complicated like this, taxation. So we could see a constitutional amendment to dedicate it for NJ Transit. I have no idea. I can't say that that's their plan. They don't specify that in the budget and brief, the documents that we've seen so far. The governor did not specify that in the speech, but it's not impossible that they go that route because they keep talking about dedication. It's possible that it's a statutory dedication, but you know as well as I, and you said it perfectly, that doesn't matter that much because the annual budget document can override every other statutory dedication and either fully fund what's in statute or not fully fund based upon that year's budget. So I don't know what route they plan to go, but that'll be something to follow and see how it's referenced in the actual bill language when we see it. For your first question, it's a question I get a lot, and it's something that I'm happy to say that there is no way to know because it's a growing movement in some states where some progressive organizations are pushing to try to make sure that there's more confidential tax information that becomes public because they want to put a target on people's backs and go after. We saw some rallies over the past couple months where they're pointing out companies, they have their logos as the bad guys and saying wildly inappropriate things about corporations that do nothing but provide good jobs and wages and benefits and important things to their community. But there's some people that want to paint every big corporation as doing something that they don't do. And so I am glad that New Jersey, it's confidential. We have no way to know the 600. The only ones that know are those taxpayers that fill out those tax returns and Division of Taxation staff who are under strict confidentiality. And I think that's appropriate. So I mean, I would imagine it's some of the 600 larger companies in the state. And so you could probably go to a list of the bigger companies in the state and figure it out. But again, sometimes big employers don't always have big profits. And this is the guys earning over $10 million. And sometimes the ones earning over $10 million could be a smaller company, but maybe they had invented something new this year or sold something as part of their company and had a big year and they might meet that, but not in the future and not be a household name that you know. But bottom line, I think we do a disservice as business community if we focus on that 600 because it's really, we all know it's so much bigger than 600. Like Eric, your members, your gas stations, none of them, I would guess, are getting $10 million a year in profit. But how much business do they get from big companies that might get over $10 million a year in profit? And maybe the transactions they have with them are going to now be more expensive because of this tax. Or maybe they'll be more difficult to do business with because you have to maybe go to another state to do it. Who knows? But it's going to impact everybody. So the other revenues, just to point out, is one that's gotten a little bit of attention, and we're calling it, and some others are calling it the bucket truck. And this one is very bare bones and has not gotten a lot of detail. And I think it was intentionally a concept the governor pushed, but they did score it for $10 million in the budget. And basically, to every truck going to a warehouse is going to be charged $1. And $1 go back to the state. And I think the administration sees the logistics industry as a growing industry in New Jersey, and you're kind of like, there's a lot of warehouses. Well, let's see if we can make some money off them. I think that's kind of a perverse way of looking at it, that we have a growing industry with a lot of opportunity. And so we're going to, of course, try to make money off it. Well, let's help them grow. But so I don't like that way of thinking, but it's also so early and not fleshed out in that, is this a tax on the truckers, which has so many problems because those truckers face a lot of regulations. It's not easy to be a trucker in the state. A lot of them are independent small businesses. Is this a tax on manufacturers? And we've done so much to help manufacturers, which is an important part of our state. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Is this tax on the retailers, which will ultimately hit our affordability and make things in New Jersey more expensive? Is this a tax on the actual warehouse? And so they don't know, how are you going to collect it? How are you going to implement it? And if you're only booking $10 million from them, that's almost a rounding error in our state budget. That's going to have a lot of punitive and symbolic effects to hurt our competitiveness. So it just seems silly. I have heard the legislature is definitely less supportive, less eager to take this seriously than, unfortunately, the corporate tax or other revenues. But But still, it's something that's out there that we need to know about. Outside of those two that have gotten the most attention on the revenue side, just also they are phasing out the EV sales tax break, which they're booking some revenue for that in this budget because they're not going to be giving out as many sales tax incentives for buying electric vehicles. They're increasing the HMO tax from 5% to 6%. They're going to increase a fee on firearms and on some security transactions. So those, I think they're more of the nickel and dime variety, but there are revenues that are going to come from that. And of course, all of these revenues, it would be inappropriate for me to forget all of you guys as employers are paying more UI payroll taxes, and we still have not gotten relief. Most states in the nation have done something to give employers some relief on unemployment insurance payroll taxes that went up through no fault of their own because of the pandemic. New Jersey did not. And so these taxes, and those are taxes on all businesses. If you employ one person, you're paying this tax. So these taxes are tough to stomach for a variety of reasons that I went through. And I see, Eric, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I understand if they were granting a sales tax exemption, you'd want to phase that in because you don't want to take the revenue hit all in one fiscal year. But if you're getting rid of a sales tax exemption, what's the rationale for not just assessing it as of date certain? They don't have as much revenue?
I am unclear on that. I think it's probably, and I've heard there's been this push and pull in the governor's office on these issues that we want to do in New Jersey as much to incentivize the growth of electric cars, hybrid cars, all green energy technology. And that's great. BIA, a lot of the business community very much supports anything we can do to be greener and cleaner. But want to avoid mandates, but we want to support incentives. So I think the governor's office probably, maybe as a compromise, hey, let's leave some of these incentives out there. I've heard from car dealers that they right now have a lot of EVs sitting on lots that are not being sold. So to wipe this away entirely as you're trying to ramp up EV sales in the state, maybe they thought it would be too much. I don't know for sure, but I'm just guessing they probably tried to find some balance because they want people buying EVs, but they also want to make sure EVs are paying their fair share. And so I think it's probably, I think both are policy goals of theirs, and I think they're trying to attain both, and that's probably not very easy. So moving away from taxes, and even though that's my job as a tax lobbyist at BIA, there's a lot of other things going on in this budget that are important for our members to understand and just think about. And again, as I'm going here too, feel free, and maybe Jamie, as I'm talking, if you could put my email and cell phone in the chat, because again, feel free. BIA and myself, we're a resource on just the budget process and any questions you have throughout on all tax stuff that's going on. So feel free to reach out. And that's why we have this webinar, and it's really the start of a process. It's not the end of us helping you on the budget. But in general, this is a $55.9 billion budget. That is up $1.6 billion, or about 2% from last year. You sometimes hear different numbers here because the administration, and not the Murphy administration, a lot of administrations have done this over the years, but they like to look at the mid-year changes that have happened and look at the increase from the revised budget to the budget proposal, which I don't really think is fair. I think you look at, okay, the signed budget was $1.6 billion, or 2% less. And so it's 55.9. And I will, as we're talking about this, let me. Yeah, so now you can see this chart. So you could see it was $54.3 billion last year and is up to $55.9 billion. Revenues have unfortunately not done as well and not grown as much. It's 52.7 last year, only grew to $54.1 billion. What is troubling is that the growth over time, and our appropriations were $21.2 billion less in the last Governor Christie budget, the last budget signed by Governor Christie. That was a 61% increase, and inflation's bad, but it's not that bad. Now, to be fair to the Murphy administration, a big chunk of that 61% increase is pension growth and school aid growth, which I think many people would say are good. And it's not necessarily fiscally irresponsible to grow pension aid and school aid when you've been so behind on both of them. But that's a chunk of it. That's not all of it. It still indicates a spending problem. Something else that's troubling within these numbers is there's a structural imbalance of $1.8 billion. And that's right here. We're negative 1.8. That means we're spending $1.8 billion more than we're bringing in. How are we able to do that? Somebody might say, I thought New Jersey had a constitutional requirement to balance the budget. We do. But balancing the budget means dipping into your surplus or dipping into prior year lapses that you didn't spend as much as you thought in certain areas and you're shifting money around. So that allows us to get away with that structural imbalance of 1.8 billion. The interesting thing is the structural imbalance actually last year was a little less than that. But then through some mid-year changes in what they want to do in the middle of FY24, the year we're currently in, it actually grew to $3.2 billion because their spending grew a big chunk in the middle of the year without legislative authority yet. And that'll come when they do a supplemental budget in June for FY24. And then our revenues slipped about $500 million from what they expected in FY24. So the structural imbalance grew in FY24. It's again shrinking for what they think in FY25 to 1.8, but it's still a problem. Whenever you're spending more than you're bringing in, that's not a place you want to be, whether you're a business or whether you're a state government. So that's something to be concerned about. And I think all these numbers point to the fact that we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. And one thing I like to say to point that out, and getting back to CBT, getting back to CBT is, if we think about the legislative add-ons that were done in last year's budget, and that's all the, whether it's called Christmas tree items or pork spending, but there was about a little over $1 billion added with no transparency, no vetting, no chance to testify on any of these ads. That was over $1 billion. And that's added not formulaically, not operationally, that's all just extras that people were asking for. Those things amounted to more than what the corporate tax is bringing in this year. So if we didn't do that, you could argue we're already covering what the corporate tax is bringing in this year. If we never ever did that and never had these legislative add-ons, how much lower would our budget be than it is right now? Would we need this tax? Would we need other taxes that we've raised over the years? I would argue no. So I think it's a spending problem that's both by the governor and by the legislature, and we need to get that under control so that we can get a more sustainable budget. Anybody questions on just overall budget numbers? So I think within those numbers, also just pointing out, they expect in FY25 most revenues to grow, income, sales. The one they don't expect to grow is corporate taxes naturally, but they do a sneaky thing where they actually separate out the new corporate transit fee, they're calling it, but that's the corporate business tax surtax. The surtax used to be part of the CBT line item in past budgets. Now it's separated out as a new fee. So they show that corporate tax line item goes down, but now there's a new $1 billion line item that's added. Corporate business taxes are combined. So overall CBT is up, but naturally, if there was no tax increase, CBT would be down. Part of that being down is because the surtax is supposed to sunset. Part of that being down is because of the natural volatility of CBT and unpredictability of it. Surplus, just wanted to comment on, again, healthy thing, good thing to have. Governor Murphy deserves credit for building it up. The signed budget back in June was $8.7 billion. It's now projected to be $6.1 billion in FY25. So that's $6.1 billion for future downturns. And I would argue that there is maybe a softening downturn of revenue right now that it could be used for. And if that 6.1 became 5.1, which is still a very healthy surplus, you wouldn't need a tax. Another interesting point on just surplus and debt is we had been happy to see in recent budgets, the legislature and Governor Murphy created a debt defeasance and prevention fund. For several budgets in a row, we invested money into that debt defeasance and prevention fund for uses for either avoiding debt or defeasing existing debt. Murphy administration has used this money to defease some debt, save some money. They've used it to prevent some debt, but this year they're booking $585 million from this fund. They're not investing anything into the fund, but this fund is doing $585 million of capital projects to prevent future debt. So whether that's good or bad that we're not investing in it, but we're actually using it to prevent future debt, and ultimately if we're building stuff, that's good, putting people to work, creating jobs. On the spending side, that revenue, that spending growth that I mentioned, the biggest three areas of spending in this year's budget was an increase in school aid, increase in property tax relief programs, and increase in affordable housing. There's a variety of other increases outside that, but those are kind of the big three the governor mentioned. But overall spending, the governor, and in his speech and in the budget in brief, points to appropriations being cut. And hey, we saved $1 billion, but appropriations are up $1.6 billion overall. So how do they get there? I think what they're pointing out is that if it wasn't for some of their saving initiatives, appropriations would have had to go up $2.6 billion. So they're basically saying we cut the budget by $1 billion, but it's still going up by 1.6 billion. So I don't know how you take that, but so efficiencies found might have saved it from going up even more, but it is going up. And again, if you're saying things are as dire and difficult as they are, and you're saying that we need to increase taxes by as much as they are, I think trying to find a flat appropriation level of instead of 1.6 up makes a lot more sense. So on the spending side, a lot of services and grants and state aid to a variety of programs has been flat. I've heard from many social service providers that are expecting flat this year, and flat is better than getting a cut. But obviously there are some people that are dealing with inflationary pressures for their businesses, whether you're a higher education institution, a behavioral health provider, that you're facing costs that are going up, and flat sometimes hard to understand, but it's better than a cut, and it's better than a large tax increase as the business community is seeing. As I said, one of the larger increases, the largest in this year's budget, is K-12 education. School aid is up $908.3 million. What's notable about this increase is not just that it's almost $1 billion increase, but also Governor Christie and Senate President Sweeney negotiated what's commonly called S2. And S2 basically tried to create a path to get to 100% school funding per the SFRA, which was Governor Corzine's school funding reform bill. And SFRA was funded in Governor Corzine's first year, and then we had a hard time getting back to funding SFRA. S2 kind of put us on a path there, and now this is the first year that S2 will be fully funded. The first time in recent memory any school funding formula has been fully funded. Now, that you would think is a great thing for all school districts, but the interesting thing with S2, which you can argue from a business conservative budgeting perspective is a good thing, that there are winners and losers. And what S2 has been doing is, if schools were overfunded based upon the students they had, the wealth and income levels of their community, the special ed and other needs they had, then overfunded means they got cut, underfunded means they were getting big increases. So it's not as easy to say school aid went up by $1 billion, so everybody's getting something. No, it's definitely some were big winners, some were losers, some were held flat, but that's all across the state. But the aggregate school aid number is up about $1 billion. Preschool is also up $124 million. And again, I think that's a good investment and future workforce development, both of them. Good investment, workforce development, and especially school aid, a good investment in property tax relief. Higher ed is more mixed, and I think workforce development is more mixed. One thing that I point out that is concerning, and BIA has had a long partnership with our community colleges who do fantastic work in our state. They are facing a $20 million operating aid cut. Most of the rest of the public higher eds are pretty much flat, but the county college is facing this $20 million operating cut is troubling. There's also a $10 million cut to our TAG program, tuition assistance. There's also a $7.3 million cut to our aid to our independent colleges and universities, went from 16.5 to 9.2, so a big cut for them. But there are some positive investments. The governor's proposed budget keeps the career pathways program that BIA has talked about with our community colleges. That is flat at $6 million. Something that I know Althea, who I see on this Zoom right now, has been a leader on. The professional licensing boards have had money stolen for years to go fund other parts of the state budget. They have announced that they're going to end $8.5 million shifting from the licensing boards to the state police. They're going to end that. So that's $8.5 million more for improving processes to get more professional licenses out as quickly as possible. And that's something that I know BIA and others here, I know looking at the CPA and Society and Jeff have asked for. So that's a positive thing. There's a new light item for summer tag, which is a good thing for higher ed. There's continued investments in nurse workforce development and teacher workforce development. So again, those are two areas where there's acute shortages right now, and it's positive to focus there. We also see the announcement for taking some workforce development partnership money to support an online database for the new minor working paper law. And that was, remember, last year, a year and a half ago now, BIA worked with several people in the business community to get this teen worker laws reformed, which has been something that I think has helped get a lot of people more summer employment. So that's higher ed workforce development, kind of mixed, as I said. Property tax relief, we see one of the other big increases in this budget is the governor's budget is proposing $100 million more towards the down payment for Stay NJ. So now it's $200 million total this year, 100 last year, 200 total. So 300 over the 2 years that are putting the down payment towards when we eventually start paying out Stay NJ. There's going to be some debate on this because obviously it's a priority for certain people in the legislature, like Speaker Coughlin, and he wants to make sure money for that is coming before other things in this budget. Like he was quoted today in the press about, hey, maybe this is more important than NJ Transit. Any dedication should be coming for this before NJ Transit. So seeing how Stay NJ money is kept and planned for, and are we ever going to get there when it's paid out eventually, that'll be something to follow. The Anchor program continues with another $22 million this year. Senior freeze expanded. But interestingly, on the property tax relief, municipal aid appears to be cut. And one way it looks like the cuts are happening is, if anybody remembers the past couple of years, the energy tax receipts, which is supposed to be municipal aid, but has been held by the state. And past couple of years, the legislature tried to push back and get more energy tax receipts returned to the municipalities, but it had to be used for property tax relief. So that's a good thing for every property taxpayer. My understanding is that legislative add-on from recent years is being cut, and so that might be some of the municipal aid that we're not seeing, and that might increase our property taxes. Something that a couple things that we're still uncertain about. Number one, hospital aid. The budget in brief refers to a shifting within the formula of how you distribute hospital aid. That is something to follow. Hospitals are important parts of our economy and our communities and the business community, and so we have to see how that plays out. Hopefully, there's no big time negative impacts on any hospitals, but we will follow that. Right now, the hospitals, I don't even think know exactly what's going to be happening on that. So that is something to follow. There's a little bit of uncertainty with some of the business programs that some of your businesses or members may have used in the past. So the Main Street Recovery Fund, manufacturing voucher programs, strategic innovation centers, they're all referenced in the budget and brief as continuing funding, but there's also a line in the budget and brief says that EDA grants, which all three of them you could argue are going down by $85.8 million in the aggregate. And so what does that mean? Does that mean Main Street is there, but it's less than it was last year? Manufacturing voucher program is there, but less than last year. And that's troubling again, because if the business community is the one that's kind of taking the burden of paying for this budget, then why are you cutting programs that are benefiting other parts of the business community more so than others? So that's one to watch. Another one to watch for the business community is for the first time, I know we've been talking about for years, it feels like, the Secure Choice Savings Program. And this is that retirement program for everybody. And it's not necessarily a financial burden for businesses, but it's more of a awareness, promotional, educational burden that your employees have to be able to either go into your program or go into a state-run program, the Secure Choice program. The budget has put $1.5 million aside to help implement that program. So that means it might finally get underway. And then 9 months after it's operational, the mandate for all employers to either offer it or allow their employees to get into the state program takes effect. Thinking about the tourism side of our state, the governor, obviously, you could see some excitement with the World Cup coming here in 2026, which is undoubtedly a good thing for the state of New Jersey. But we want to make sure it's as good as possible for the state. And so they put $17.5 million towards international events, improvements, and attraction. So I think a lot of that is World Cup readiness. We also see, talking about infrastructure, which is important, $15 million for grid modernization, for making us as ready for clean energy as possible. I know the state of the state, we spent some time talking about the AI moonshot, and BIA is a big believer in innovation as a way to grow the economy. So we see some investments here, $4.5 million for an innovation challenge to support AI projects, $2.5 million for an innovation fellows program for AI startups, and $500,000 for higher ed entrepreneurship and residence programs. So all of that encouraging our innovation economy and AI. You could argue an AI moonshot probably requires a lot more than $7.5 million, but investing in that is not a bad thing. On childcare, which BIA again is focusing on as very important to our economy and important underpinning the entire workforce. There was an announcement that there's $15 million from federal ARPA funds to continue the EDA's childcare facilities program, which is a good thing. But then a not so good thing is the budget calls for a planned end of the enrollment-based funding and moving to attendance-based funding in January 2025. And so this has been something that's been up in the air. There's been legislation to try to help out our child care providers to get this more stable funding if you do enrollment-based instead of attendance-based, but that looks like it's going to phased out end on January 2025. Something that I've heard from a lot of folks in the tourism shore industry is the Shore Protection Fund. And right now that's something that BIA is trying to do our best to follow up on and figure out where it is, because last year they were successful to grow to $50 million in shore protection funds, and Jersey Shore Partnership does a fantastic job leading the way on this. Right now, with the lack of details in budget and brief and needing to see budget language, it's unclear exactly what's happening with that, but that would be concerning if it's anything less than what they got last year, and especially if it's cut as much as it looks like it could be. So that's a lot of the details. And before I go through just what's next and what's going to happen over the next 4 months, wanted to see if there are more questions about spending details, revenue details, anything else before I jump into just what's on tap next. Yes, sir.
Chris, I need your help because I've read this multiple times, and you've already discussed the revenue side on New Jersey Transit, in that this $857 million is going to be for FY26. In FY24, Transit is receiving $809 million, or I should say Transit is using $809 million of COVID money in FY24 that they're not going to have in FY25. The budget in brief talks about this new money for FY26, but doesn't explain how they're going to backfill the $800 million hole in FY25. Do you have any insight into that?
So what I was told is through a combination of the federal aid that they were all right with in FY25, especially because of the fare increases that were recently announced that get them a couple $100 million. So I think there's different federal aid that is phasing out. I also think there's different pockets of money that the state is sending them. And you and I have had conversations about this. It's terribly complicated when you look at what's coming from the gas tax, what's coming from the turnpike, what's coming from general fund, and now it's going to be what's coming from the CBT. So it's hard to predict. And to be honest with you, I think sometimes they want it to be hard to understand. But my understanding is, and the budget in brief says this, and I've talked to some people in Treasury and the governor's office, that the NJ Transit's cliff was FY26. And FY26, they'll have the CBT money to cover it. FY25, they were all right. It was more of a few $100 million problem instead of a $1 billion problem. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure which pandemic aid that you're referring to is lapsing, but I know some are lapsing, but I think they still have some. And also, like, ridership has improved a little bit, and maybe they've, God help us, maybe they found some efficiencies. But we will definitely stay tuned on that. As part of the governor's speech and as part of other conversations I've had with people, they are committed to try to find efficiencies and make them a little bit cheaper. But NJ Transit is a very expensive mass transportation system. I think MTA might be the only one that's more expensive, but it's a lot more expensive per rider and overall than some others in the region like SEPTA. Thanks, Eric. Doug, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Might be related to Eric's as well, but any other explicit references or mentions to the remaining ARPA dollars in the budget?
There's a handful, like I mentioned, the childcare one. There are a couple. I can't say I think you're going to get more of that once you see budget language, because honestly, the budget in brief is tricky because sometimes it will be like some of the narrative part of it will talk as if we're adding money for this or that, and then you realize it's federal money, and then sometimes it's talking about it in a state money, but sometimes it's new state money and sometimes existing state money. It's hard to read the narrative and know exactly if it's new or old or federal or state. Once you get the budget, the full budget book, the budget language will specify, and ARPA doesn't actually, it's off budget, and ARPA money, usually they'll specify how that's getting spent through budget language. The budget language we don't see until that larger book comes out, which should be soon. And then you got to scour that larger book and or just kind of look for the words, like do word finds and figure out where they're using ARPA. I have heard that the plan is to use most of the rest of the ARPA funds at the end of this year's budget, similar to what we've seen. So you won't even see it in the proposed budget language, but budget language that we see kind of at the last minute in June this year will be sort of like what we've seen in the past, doling out ARPA money for the things that are eligible for that. So I can't say that I've been a big fan the way they've done it, because I wish the legislature and governor were working more hand in hand and actually planning out the best way to get the best bang for our buck instead of just kind of doling it out at the last second without any proper vetting. But it is what it is, and ARPA money has gone for some good causes.
Yeah, great, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. You have a question?
Yeah, you just mentioned the budget book. So two questions. About how long do you think that'll be until it comes out?
So that's always a good question. There are times where I remember it being out by now, and there are times when I remember it being like a week or two later. And so there are times when I remember actually testifying at the public hearings on the budget without actually seeing the budget book, which is not a good case, and I don't expect that, but that has happened at times. So it's hard to predict, and a lot of it is, do they have all of the details ironed out? And if they don't, that's where they have a little more time until the budget book comes out for those details, and then that will kind of have the end of the details. I think I saw somebody put in the chat something about Laura Gunn. Thank you, Laura. They heard March 12th for the governor's detailed budget, which would be kind of right in the middle of the budget hearings. And also, while I reminded about budget hearings, any of you, and I know some of you do, whether it's all nonprofits out there that are doing great work, business organizations, any taxpayer organizations, anybody out there, anybody has clients that care about the budget hearings are up. And so I would encourage you to sign up and make sure your voices are heard, because a lot of times you get voices heard from a lot of the folks that are kind of anti-business and not necessarily friends of taxpayers. And so I think if we all sign up and make sure that we're letting them know how to help nonprofits, how to help our economy, how to help our particular members in certain ways, that would be how to help our particular parts of the state, our counties, our municipalities. That would be great.
Chris, one other thing on that budget
Yes,
book.
Jeff.
So how much more information is that going to give to somebody who wants to understand more about the CBT hike than what the budget in brief does? Is it really just more a listing of more specific numbers, but really nothing about, how it would be implemented? In other words, I guess my point is, do I go back to this guy and say, right now, there's just the budget in brief, which tells you nothing. But if you look at the budget book coming out in X number of weeks, you'll get more? Or is that just as futile?
There's a chance on something like a tax increase that is just as futile, because tax increases, you need to see what the actual bill says.
Right. Okay.
But I have seen years where they specified revenue raiser out ideas a little more in the rhetoric in the budget book, or you've seen it spelled out a little more where you could tell the line items what exactly they're doing. Or exactly how much something's going to cost, how some of the shifting of money in places. So you definitely get some detail that you don't get right now. But for a typical like business tax increase like this, I think we probably have the detail that we're going to have, unfortunately, probably to like May or June. And then May or June, we may get more. And then to what I was going to get into is just what's next is right now, they're starting the budget process, and the budget hearings I mentioned are up. So the month of March is usually hearing from the public about the budget. And BIA is already slated to testify at those hearings. And I'm sure some of you will also be there, and I look forward to seeing you at the Senate hearing. There's one in person, one virtual, and the Assembly are both virtual. Then you get to April and early May, and that's when the department hearings come up. And I would, again, encourage you to reach out to me or also to lobby your legislators, because if you're concerned about something you see in a particular department, community affairs, transportation, treasury, when that commissioner or that treasurer is up in front of the legislature, you can get them to ask your question, and you could have the chair or somebody else kind of pushing the thing that you want pushed, or I could help and reach out, because usually BIA is getting them questions that we want asked to make sure it's on their radar, to make sure the governor knows it's a priority of the legislature in addition to a priority of one of us. So use that process. It's another process to lobby and advocate for you, your members, your clients. And so we're happy to help with that and give you ideas to help with that. So that'll be through mid-May, and then mid-May through June is when ultimately rubber meets the road, and probably Speaker Coughlin, Senate President Qatari, and the governor are ironing this out. And we don't know how it's going to work, but that's a long ways from now. And I can tell you for a fact, there is zero chance that every single thing that the governor proposed is going to happen. But there's zero chance that most of what the governor proposed is not going to happen. Usually the governor gets a lot of what he wants, but there's definitely changes by the legislature. Some of those changes make things better. Some of those changes make things worse. But if we're part of the process, hopefully that helps. What I am interested to see myself, and business community will be interested in, is number one, it was a startling omission that there was nothing said about the Transportation Trust Fund. We talked about NJ Transit, but there's another transportation issue in our state that needs some funding and needs reauthorization, and that's the TTF. BIA and a number of business organizations were happy to see the deal that was made 8 years ago, but that had a net tax cut, but a gas tax increase to invest in our roads and bridges. They're not sure how long the reauthorization is going to be. They're not sure what kind of a gas tax increase. Are they going to touch anything else like EVs? So all that's to be ironed out. But the fact that the governor didn't say anything about it in the budget address, when it's got to happen at some point soon, my gut tells me this might be now a last minute thing in June, which is troubling, because something as complicated as TTF shouldn't be a last minute thing. But that'll be something to watch for. Something else is the sales tax has been talked about as potentially something else they were looking at to dedicate. I think dedicating sales tax makes a lot more sense for something you value than corporate taxes. I think there's some folks that see politically less advantageous to increase sales taxes. I would argue that it's not about increasing, but if we dedicate existing sales tax and as it grows, we take that dedicated growth and put it towards something we think is important, and let time and discipline eventually get us there, as we did with the pension funding and school funding. We can see a big amount of money go towards NJ Transit or Stay NJ or anything. So it'll be interesting to see if sales tax enters this conversation. John Endyke, I see your hand up.
Yeah, Chris, thank you. But to Jeff's question, the other thing that I always find helpful in the budget details that are not in the budget in brief, and you have to wait until the budget legislation, is the budget language that the governor's putting forth. You can get a lot of details out of that. Like, we always look for that. There's supposedly, I think, 114 million more for long-term care, family care services. I don't know what they're going to do with that. Budget language may provide that information. So, that's one thing that's always helpful in seeing the detailed budget.
Yeah, that'll be helpful. And John, I was thinking about you when I was looking at the budget in brief when it came out, and trying to decipher some of the nursing home, long-term care issues, because they make it very hard to understand exactly what their plan is. Like, you see that it's a growth of over $113 million to meet increasing needs for long-term care population, including an extra 7.2 to provide wage increases in nursing home staff. But you don't really get any specifics on what that is. So I'm guessing it might be a budget language thing, but and then it says 4 million more for long-term care reform, reform and response in Department of Health. Again, what does that mean? You know better than me, but it seems like it's definitely a lot more vague than it should be.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they're giving, not to take any away from the needs of the veterans in the veterans homes, but they're giving a ton of money to them, and money for salary increases works out to like $5 a day for them and 79 cents a day for the rest of us, rest of the private sector nursing homes. So, if they acknowledge that it costs money to take care and to improve centers, they're giving the state-run veterans homes a lot more money than they're giving us. And it's just, not equitable.
No, I think equitable is a good word. And I turn to Althea on the BIA team, who always has a fantastic point about we're investing all this and stay in J, and we want to keep our seniors here, but yet some of the other policies for our seniors don't necessarily make sense and fit with the idea of trying to attract and keep our seniors. And so how it's treating nursing homes, how it's treating other things that our seniors depend upon, it's just there seems to be a disconnect. So hopefully we get that sorted out, because I know, our nursing homes are important employers, important parts of our economy, and doing very important work for a lot of our most vulnerable. Any other questions? Okay, well, again, as I said, please continue to use BIA as a resource. And again, don't just think, oh, well, it's not a business issue. Like, obviously, hospital funding, higher ed funding, nursing home funding, nonprofit funding, all of those things, you guys are all important employers in our state and important parts of our economy and important BIA members. And so don't just think that it's all about corporate taxes. And that's a big deal. And that's sort of why this budget's kind of an affront to us. But that doesn't mean that we can't fight to make it a little better for some other folks in the business community and the NJBIA membership. So happy to help you, whether it's just strategize offline, understand some of the details, but yeah, happy to do whatever you need. So Jamie was very helpful, put my cell phone and email into the chat. And so please reach out and let me know if you have any questions. And the entire BIA team, if you see us at events, you see us at your chambers, you see us at the State House, please let us know. We're all happy to try to help. And if it's a in the weeds budget question, I'm sure the rest of the team can get it back to me. And we want to be there for you for the next 4 months to help decipher this complicated stuff. So don't hesitate to reach out. And any more questions before we close? But I know we want to take an hour, and it's right at the hour.
Yeah, I have and if it takes too long to answer this, it'll put us over. Don't do it. The TTF, when I think back to when that was first done, that deal with the state tax and all that, I thought it was set so that it automatically, there was some sort of formula that automatically adjusted and decided, the formula decided how much taxes, gas tax had to go up, et cetera. And that if it wasn't done right, there was a poison pill. So now, though, it sounds, and I know nothing about the TTF, now it sounds like as if it's all up for grabs, like they can do whatever they want. So what am I missing here?
No, you are right, Jeff, in that they did a formula to figure out how to maintain the $2 billion a year. So if the gas tax brought in less than that, they adjusted the penny up. If the gas tax brought in more than that, they adjusted the penny down. And there's examples where they did both of those things in the past couple of years. That kept the TTF at a $2 billion rate. And that $2 billion buys you a certain amount of construction activity and rebuilding our roads and bridges, and all that's important. But you can imagine that $2 billion today of that activity is going to get you less than what $2 billion 8 years ago gets you. And you can imagine that in 8 years from now, that $2 billion is going to get you even less. And so there are people that, whether it's care about the quality of our roads and bridges and the safety and the importance they have in the logistics industry, or folks that want the construction jobs that are going to come from those things, they want to make sure there's a similar amount of activity in the building and construction that's going to come. And because of inflation, which has been bad recently, that $2 billion is not getting you that same activity that it used to get. So you're right that there's a inflationary adjustment to keep the $2 billion flat, but it's not going to necessarily keep the same amount of activity flat. And it's also, you're up against the reauthorization deadline, 8 years, regardless of the actual gas tax, but just you need to reauthorize a new transportation trust fund program because the last one was 8 years. So again, they could do it for, we've seen 5 years, we've seen 8 years. The number is whatever they want, and we'll see what happens with that. That's one of the variables that we have to wait and see. But yeah, that $2 billion is going to be consistently coming in It's just, I think some people think that we need more now.
And just the one thing that might not be the top of everyone's mind is 760 billion of that 2 billion goes right back out the door to New Jersey Transit. So 38 cents of every gas tax dollar currently goes to New Jersey Transit, on top of the $440 million in turnpike revenue that goes to New Jersey Transit. Just little factoid.
Eric, you make it sound like we're feeding the belly of the beast here with NJ Transit. Okay, well, good luck, everybody, fighting the good fight on the budget, and hopefully you help your members, yourself, your clients, and helping the business community make our budget a little more pro-taxpayer, pro-business. And I look forward to being of assistance. Also, be on the lookout. There will be a NJBIA budget at first glance document, which kind of puts in writing a lot of what I said, does a little more detail. That chart that I showed for a few minutes will be in there, just so you'll have that document. That'll probably be emailed to you sometime tomorrow. So thank you. Have a nice day and look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you.